Assalamu alaikum. I hope all the students are fine and at the best of their health. So, as you all know, that during this pandemic, HEC have uh, asked us to deliver online lectures. So, I am recording my first online lecture for the subject HCI, which I am going to teach to my students of BS Software final year evening. And mm, of course, we are not familiar of recording lectures, so this is also my first time. So if you face any difficulty in understanding the lecture or in the audio of this video recording, or even with the mode of my language, please let me know. We'll try to keep the mode of language in English in the video recordings, um, because that's the standard, and I'll try to be as slow or as clear as possible in my mode of language. But don't worry, if you do not understand any stuff in the recording, please note the slide number down. And we have a live Q&A session every week. So what I will be doing is I'll taking the live Q&A session every week, at least once a week, and I'll try to like answer your queries in native languages like Urdu and Sindhi. So if you do not understand the contents of any slide, please let me know the slide number during my live session, and we'll discuss about it. Okay, so don't worry, we'll sort things out uh, with this particular problem, that is the mode of language. Now let's start the lecture. Previously we have already covered many of the stuff in HCI, like we have gone through that why we need HCI actually, what is the importance of the task, what is the importance of the interface, like what are the human abilities, are the what is the importance of kind of making the interface invisible. And we have also gone through a kind of HCI applications. We have gone through feedback cycles, that what is the importance of feedback in our interfaces. We have gone through HCI design principles and other stuff. So today we are going to talk about design principles and heuristics. And please let me know if you have any problem during my last lecture, so we can also discuss that in our live sessions. So let's start. So over the many years of HCI development, experts have come up with a wide variety of principles and heuristics, and we'll discuss that how we can show that and what kind of heuristics have been proposed by existing researchers, or like a kind of pioneers in this field. So these are of course not hard and fast rules. You can bend them, you can change them, you can adopt them based on your own understanding and based on your own application. Because as we will discuss, these principles were a kind of deviated towards a specific application or towards a specific modality. But what we need to do is we need to find a balance, because as we will progress through this lecture, you will understand that some of the principles defy one another. So it's important that you should uh, make an interface based on your application and based on the feasibility of how the users may use your application with respect to these particular principles and heuristics. So these are just a kind of a complementary guideline for designing your interface. They are not a kind of a holy grail that you have to follow them to a T. This is not the case. You have to adapt those principles which are actually needed. So one of popular name in HCI is Don Norman, and Don Norman provided 6 principles, and we'll see that what those 6 principles were. Another set of principles which we are going to talk about in this lecture is Constantine and Lockwood's 6 principles. They also provided 6 principles, and then there is Nielsen's 10 heuristics, which we're going to discuss about, and then there are 7 principles of universal design. So what we are going to do is we will talk about these principles. What I have done is I have a kind of a shortlisted or compiled 15 unique principles from all these 4 set of principles. Okay, so we'll discuss about it. So basically, the Don Norman has a book named The Design of Everyday Things, which uh, talks about these 6 principles, and they have recently added the 7th principle, which will shed some light on in later in this lecture or later in this series of lectures. Then there is usability and inspection methods by Nielsen's, which provide 10 heuristics. Interesting fact is that Don Norman and Nielsen did business together and formed Nielsen Norman Group, which was for uh, the user experience training and consulting and HCI research. So they both have did business together, and they both are popular names in the field of HCI. Another book which is Software for Use is proposed by Constantine and Lockwood, and they propose 6 principles. Of course, there are some overlapping in these principles, so I will explain that what are those overlaps, where are those overlaps, and why do we select these principles. That all will be covered in this lecture. Now another one is Ronald Mace, which provides 7 principles of universal design. While the above 3, which is Don Norman's, Constantine and Lockwood and Nielsen's, are concerned with usability in general, universal design in specific is concerned with designing interfaces and devices that can be used by everyone, regardless of age, disability, and so on. So the sets of principles, it's like we will talk about the 4 sets of design principles, which I already explained, like Don Norman, Nielsen, and Jakob Nielsen, basically, Constantine and Lockwood, and Ronald Mace. So this is the book, The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman. It has 6 design principles, but the most recent version of this book has 7th principle as well. And that 7th principle is actually a kind of a whole lecture in our course. So I'll go through the detail of those of that 7th principle. It's kind of a mental models. Norman and Nielsen later formed a business, which I already explained, and is named as Nielsen Norman Group. They all present some principles which may overlap as well, and I'll show you that where they overlap, so don't worry about it. So there is a whole table which explains that where is the overlap going on. And this is the book from Jakob Nielsen, 10 Design Heuristics. Another one is Human Computer Interaction by Dix. So see that these are not only the 4 principles, there are many others which will discuss about in the at the end of this slide lectures. So one of them is Dix et al, and they also provide some of the principles which are different to these 4 set of principles. So I would recommend you to read about those principles, but what I am going to do is I am going to only touch on these 15 unique principles by different researchers which I have compiled, and rest of them I'll leave it to you. So if you want to explore more about it, please go through that, and we'll discuss about it in our live session. There is Larry Constantine and Lucy Lockwood, 6 principles, and Ronald Mace 7 Principles of Universal Design, which is actually the Center of Excellence in Universal Design is actually working on these principles currently. So this is an ongoing work. So the sets which we are going to discuss is discoverability, feedback, constraints, mapping, consistency, affordances, structure, simplicity, tolerance, equity, flexibility, perceptibility, ease, comfort, and documentation. Now, all these sets of principles, like 15 set of principles, it's not in just one book. It's like Don Norman's only provides 6 principles. Similarly, the Constantine, Lucy and Lockwood provides 6 principles, and then there is Nielsen provides 10 principles, and so forth. So they are provided in a different setting, but these are the mostly used ones. So what I am trying to do is I am trying to explain here the most usable principles and design heuristics in the literature, and I'll leave the others to you for your reading, that how you can explore others and what is there any important principle which I have missed and can be used in your application like effectively. So you have to tell me that, you have to kind of search for it and let me know that is there any principle which I have missed, which can be used or which can be considered an important one. So this is a kind of a matrix. I have actually missed the documentation part, I guess. So there is another table at the end of the slide, so you can see that. But the important part of this table is that you may know, you will see that which of the researchers or which of these popular figures in HCI have proposed these particular principles and heuristics. So you can see that equity, ease, and comfort has only been proposed in universal design because they look at the holistic version of this particular principles that can be applied to a larger audience rather than confined within the user experience. And then you can see structure is only proposed by Constantine and Lockwood. The one which is mostly agreed upon are discoverability, simplicity, basically perceptibility, consistency, tolerance, feedback, and constraint. So they are actually agreed upon design heuristics and principles. So we will talk about in detail and see that what are those principles and how these principles can be used in a design of application. So discoverability. Discoverability, the definition of is it possible to even figure out what actions are possible and where and how to perform them. So this definition has been performed by the Don Norman, and Jakob Nielsen says that minimize the user's memory load by making objects, actions, and options visible. Instructions for use of the system should be visible or easily retrievable whenever appropriate. Similarly, this has been proposed by Larry Constantine and Lucy Lockwood as well, which defines it as the visibility principle. And they say that the design should make all needed options and materials for a given task visible without distracting the user with extraneous or redundant information. Now, in other words, if I may say, is that when the user does not know what to do, they should be able to easily figure out what to do in this case. The idea behind all three of these principles is that relevant functions should be made visible so the user can discover them, as opposed to having to read about them in some documentation or learn them through some tutorial. So let's see an example from PowerPoint. So you may see that these are the options which are actually discoverable. So it means that if you want to use the text box, you can just click on it. So this option is quite discoverable. Similarly, if you want to add new slide, if you want to change the layout, so it's quite discoverable, and the options are actually available here. We will talk about this interface more, but the thing is that you have to provide a kind of a discoverability option to the user, that what options they may use, and they should be available right in front of them, so that there should be no cognitive load on their memory or on their kind of mind, or in their kind of a processing. It's like taking out the processing and computation part from the user side, so they may focus more on the task, and by making the options more discoverable, so that they do not have to go through the search bar in this presentation, that where this option lies around, and then read the documentation. So that's a kind of a hectic part. So you need to understand that we have to make the options discoverable, so to reduce that computational overload from the users. So for Nielsen, this means that I don't have to remember all of these. I just have to recognize them when I see them in the toolbars. We have already discussed about the problem of remembering and recognizing in our previous lectures, and we have already discussed that it is uh, important to recognize rather than remember, because recognizing has a less computational overhead on your mental model or on your mind rather than remembering. So if you are able to recognize, it's better to make the option discoverable, which can be easily recognized. For instance, even if there is no caption to this part, which is the text box, it is easily understandable that this adds some text based on the image, or based on the what you say is a kind of a notion which has been used for representing this particular text box. So it's clear that it is there to add the text. Similarly, there are shapes drawn, so it is clear that it adds some shape. So even though there is no caption to these options, it is easily understandable, so the user may recognize that what these options do rather than they remember. And that's what the goal of the Nielsen's definition. Now, for example, I don't have to remember arrange as some keyboard. I have to type in manually to bring up some ideas about how I might arrange things, like here. Let's start some pointer. So see, arrange here. So all I have to do is recognize arrange as the right button when I see it. While this might be true at the application level, it's not often true at the operating system level, because the operating system does not command so much screen real estate all the time, and probably for good reason. So for example, on a Mac, I can use command shift 4 to take a screenshot only of a certain area of my screen. However, the only way I know of to find that is to Google it or read it in a menu. It is not discoverable or visible on its own, and you might never even realize it's possible. So the principle of discoverability advocates the function be visible to the user so that they can discover them rather than relying on learning them elsewhere. Constantine and Lockwood principle of visibility would add on to this that we shouldn't get too crazy. We want to make functions discoverable, but that does not mean just throwing everything. Now in this example, if you will see, there are so many options to look at, and one may get confused at what options they can use. So being discoverable does not mean that you should throw everything onto the user and let them decide. This particular interface may give more cognitive load to the user rather than the ones for searching, like going for the search for documentation or reading the documentation for a particular option. So this may like add more cognitive load. uh, b- uh, like it's like you are making things more discoverable, but by doing so you are adding more cognitive load on the user side. So in this case, how can one focus on the task when there is so many options to look at and you have to find them, that where to look for a particular option which can be usable for you, or what you are looking for at this instant. So the Constantine and Lockwood principle is all about that we shouldn't go too crazy to make all the options discoverable, and we want to walk a line between discoverability and simplicity. So discoverability and simplicity are two complementary things. We'll discuss the simplicity in our like next slides, but saying so, it's uh, good to know the user, which I already explained to you in my previous lectures, that you have to know the user. You have to understand that what your user wants, and you have to design the interface based on the the feedback from the user, which you have to constantly uh, obtain. So basically the thing is that the interfaces are designed for the user for a specific application, and if your user is okay with all that particular options being discoverable, then it's okay. But if you are catering on to the general audience, that it can be used by novices, it can be used by experts, it can be used by um, every age group, then you have to be simple in your design. You have to make things discoverable, but not throw everything to at the user at the same time. So let's see. um, so here Morgan performs some of the gestures with respect to discovering, so we'll discuss while the video goes on. So here Morgan like have every day to day stuff. So she is rejecting a call, or she is taking a snapshot, she is taking a selfie, and she is making a call. So here some of the gestural, like we use the gestural interface with our smartphones and with our tablets and with our laptops right now. So while doing so, Morgan has performed 4 different operations. One is rejecting a call, second is taking a snapshot, third is taking the selfie, and fourth is making a call. So in this case, what the gestural interfaces can do, if the options are discoverable, Morgan should know that for rejecting a call, she can just turn down the phone upside down. So many of the smartphones understand that gesture, and the call is actually silent. So it's like it either it is disconnected, or either the call is made silent. So this is one of the options to do it, but how to make this discoverable is the important idea of HCI engineer, so that it can be embedded in the interface. Similarly, if you want to take a selfie, you can use a keyword shoot. So that particular keyword would kind of invoke that particular application, so that the selfie could be taken, or an application is open to take a selfie. Or it's like if the application is already open, then that particular keyword will trigger will trigger or make the smartphone take the selfie automatically. So that's some of the things which can be done with these gestural interfaces. Now similarly, for taking the screenshot of taking the screenshot, you can actually swipe the hand. So if you swipe the hand of, if you move 3 fingers, if you have a kind of a Oppo phone or something like that, so it varies from phone to phone, but the gestural uh, stuff can actually make it happen without doing a kind of like keeping it in front of you and then pressing two buttons. So it's better to use the gestural interface rather than just using it manually, or like pressing the buttons, which are quite awful at some times. And similarly, for the last call, making a call, you can just say the name of the person which you want to make a call, and the call can be dialed automatically. So this is your assignment, one of the assignments for the next class. You have to look for the options, that how we can make the options discoverable in your interface based on your application. So you have to take your mini project in this case, and say for suppose you have designed an application for gamers, so how you can make the options discoverable while they are playing the game. So that's one of the use cases. So you have to come up with the use cases of the mini project which you are designing, and then you have to explain that how you can make the things discoverable while not being too crazy, or while not being uh, like the one which I have showed you, that throwing everything at the user. So it will be very difficult in the case of gamers, that if they see all the options in front of them, they will get confused whether to play the game or whether to kind of look for the options. So you have to be simple and you have to be discoverable at the same time. So in the live sessions we'll discuss more about it, but in the assignments you have to provide a report that what can you do for making things discoverable. Okay, so this part of the lecture I'll conclude it here, and then I'll upload another series of lectures where I will explain the other design principles and heuristics as well. So stay safe. Bye.